Interlude, the Librarians. They have annotated this entire volume, the bracketed voices, the kept here by the librarians of the city that was Ashford, the charters and the unlocked cases, and they have never once been given a chapter, which is exactly how they would have it, which is exactly why they're getting one. The Librarians of Ashford, the institution that keeps the keeping, the order that grew up around the books the way the archive grew around the card, and the last working culture of the New World that this book has not yet walked the reader through. I have been their most demanding patron for 50 years. The debt comes due in print. There were no librarians at the founding. There was Pilar Reyes, the feverish child of the farmhouse, grown into the young archivist who carried me my own dissertation in a box. And there was Salvage, the drowned paper of the old world, the basements of the dead town, 2 centuries of records that the apocalypse had interrupted mid-sentence. Pilar's first great work, the one that founded the order without meaning to, was the Salvage Census. 10 years of her young life spent cataloging what the old world had left in its drawers. And the census's famous finding, the one that set the librarian's whole character, was a number of everything recoverable from the ruins of Ashford, the personal papers, letters, diaries, recipe cards, the shoebox archives of ordinary households, outweighed the official record 11-1. The old world kept itself, Pilar wrote in the census's preface, which the order still gives its novices on day 1, in exactly the inverse proportion to what it honored. It built marble for the charters and shoeboxes for the love letters, and the marble is rubble now, and the shoeboxes survived, and the lesson for this library is permanent. Honor at the shoebox layer. The grand documents take care of themselves. We are here for the recipe cards. Honor at the shoebox layer. Everything the reader has met of them descends from that finding. The unlocked cases. The margins ruled more precious than the texts. The equipment shelf class, where this book lives. The refusal, gentle and total, to let anything under their roof become too important to handle. The library Hollis built them has no rare books room. It has, instead, the most read room, where the volumes are ranked by wear, reshelved annually, the tattiest copies promoted to the door, and the order's highest internal honor, awarded each year to one book, is a small brass plate reading, Falling Apart, a credit to us all. This volume has won it 4 times. The librarians inform me, with what I can only call institutional satisfaction, that the founding manuscript is now structurally unsound from handling and will require its 3rd rebinding. They have scheduled the rebinding, per tradition, for the day of kept questions, and will leave the old binding's fragments in the case, labeled, per tradition, worn out by exactly the people it was for. Their order has rules, evolved across 50 years, and the rules are the chapter, because they are the soft way translated into the dialect of paper, and some world will need them. A book is not kept until it is copied. One copy is a hostage to fortune. The last library of the Atlas taught everyone. The librarian's first daily labor, before the doors open, is the morning's copying. By hand, deliberately, because, the head librarian's standing answer to 50 years of offered efficiencies, a copied book is a read book. The hand learns what the eye skims. We are not preserving objects. We are rereading the civilization to itself every morning, and that work cannot be delegated to anything that doesn't have a heart to break. The margins belong to the readers. Codified after the marginalia of this book proved itself. Every library copy of everything carries wide margins by design, and the annotations are catalogued with the text, and a much annotated copy outranks a clean one in the order's esteem, forever. The novices are taught the doctrine in the form of the founding paradox. A perfect uncut copy tells you a book was bought. The margins tell you it arrived. Nothing burns. The rule with the hard history. In the order's 2nd decade, a faction proposed culling. The old world's records included its cruelties, its clipboard archives, the paperwork of every pre-war meanness, and the case for a clean shelf was made with love. The debate reached the council. The council, per custom, sent it back. Librarians' business. and the order settled it with the ruling the head librarian read aloud at the equinox, which has governed every collection on 4 worlds since. We keep the cruel papers for the same reason. The home keeps the warden's gallery, and the lexicon keeps the word smoothing. A civilization that edits its shelves, edits its memory, and an edited memory is a smoothing administered by index. Nothing burns. The cruel papers get context, commentary, and the same dry shelf as everything else. And the children get taught to read them, the way the door class reads the high wall. This stone was real. Look what we do now. That is the entire defense against repetition that paper can provide. It is not small. Shelve them. And the last rule, the one they would never state but practice daily, the one I have watched from my reading room chair for 50 years, and will state for them as this chapter's close. The librarians read the room before the books. Watch them work. The novice steered toward the funny shelf on her hard day. The old man's habitual chair held empty by unspoken consensus. The boat token logic applied to readers. The gone to the roof respected. The too many days running gently checked. And you understand, eventually, what the order actually is. They are Mrs. Adeyemi's trade, scaled to a civilization's memory, the noticing profession, working a room where everyone carries something, holding handles 10 seconds at a time, with the books as the coffee. Pilar asked at her retirement what the librarians were for. The grand version, for the speeches, declined the grand version, as her order always declines it, and gave the shoebox answer, the one on the wall of every library on 4 worlds, the one this chapter was written to shelve where it belongs. We're for the same thing every keeper was ever for. Somebody walks in, carrying a day you know nothing about, and somewhere in this building is the exact page that was written, maybe 400 worlds ago, maybe last spring, by somebody else carrying the same day. Our whole craft is standing between those 2 people. One of them possibly dead, possibly distant, possibly the author of an 800-page wall, and making the introduction. That's it. That's the job. We are a civilization's way of making sure no one is ever the first one to feel anything. Which, if you've read the famous book all the way to the back, you'll recognize. It's the same job as the footsteps in the silence. Ours just arrive in shelving order, and never stop coming, and are open. And she gestured at the doors, her doors, the doors that this book's whole long argument insists be locked never and nowhere. Late. Chapter 59. The Atlas of Saved Worlds. The Deck of Many Hands. There is a page of the Atlas that the children love best, and I love it too, because it is the page about play, and a universe that forgot how to play would not be worth saving, and so I give you the world the emissaries called the Deck of Many Hands. It was a world that ran on cards. Not glyphs exactly, though it had those too, but cards as a way of life. A whole civilization that had discovered, long before the hunger came, that the system's deck logic was not a constraint but a game, and had built its entire culture around it. The people of the Deck of Many Hands did not have fixed classes the way most worlds did. They had hands, loadouts they assembled and reassembled, traded and gifted, combined and recombined, an endless joyful tinkering with the building blocks of ability, and their greatest heroes were not their strongest warriors, but their cleverest deck builders, the ones who could take a hand of unremarkable cards and find the combination that made them sing. And when the hunger came for them, the Deck of Many Hands met it the way they met everything, as a puzzle, not grimly, gleefully. Their keeper of the dead was a young deck builder named Andre who, upon realizing he was looping, did not despair. He got excited, because a loop, to a deck builder, is the dream. Infinite attempts to find the perfect combination, every death a reshuffling, every dawn a fresh hand. Andre treated his apocalypse as the hardest and best puzzle anyone had ever been handed, and he attacked it with the pure joy of a player who has finally found a game worthy of him. The emissaries who reached him barely had to teach him anything. He had already worked out, on his own, half of what had taken me 64 loops, the attunement, the banking of progress across resets, the building of a permanent deck. What they brought him was not knowledge, it was players. Because here is the thing the deck of many hands taught the new age about the soft way. And it is a lesson I treasure. The soft way is not only carried by grief, it is also carried by joy, and by play, and by the particular love that people who build things together have for each other. Andre did not save his world by suffering nobly through it. He saved it by getting very good players together and having the time of their lives solving it. His party was not a grim band of survivors. It was a guild, a laughing, arguing, endlessly tinkering guild of deck builders who treated the climbing of the tower as the greatest cooperative puzzle ever devised, who passed cards to each other and called out combinations and celebrated each floor like a level cleared, who were, the emissaries reported with a kind of wonder, having fun, genuinely, in the middle of the apocalypse, because they had figured out that a hard problem faced with people you love and a spirit of play is not suffering. It is the best thing there is. Why would I be sad, Andre reportedly said, when an emissary, conditioned by 406 grim apocalypses, expressed surprise at the guild's high spirits. This is the best puzzle anyone's ever made. The stakes are real, the mechanics are deep, the cooperation is everything, and I get to solve it with my favorite people in the world. Yeah, it's the end of everything. That just means it matters. You don't solve a puzzle that matters by crying about it. You solve it by loving the solving, together, all the way to the last card. He grinned. The emissary reported, the grin of a player in flow. Pass me your steadfast, I've got a combo. Trust me, this is going to be beautiful. It was beautiful. The deck of many hands climbed its tower as the most joyful cooperative campaign in the Atlas, and reached the top, and Andre looked at the chair and the smoothing and said, "Oh, I see. It's a trap card. It looks like a reward, but it deletes your whole deck. Classic. No thanks. I worked hard on this deck, and I'm not discarding it for a nap." And the smoothing of the deck of many hands, faced with a keeper who treated the gravest choice in the universe as a recognizable game mechanic to be played around, simply could not get purchase. The way it could not get purchase on Reggie's jokes, the way it could not get purchase on anything that refused to be solemn and alone. I have thought about the deck of many hands, alongside the heavier pages of the Atlas, the long night and Marrow and Carend, and I have come to believe that they are not opposites. That joy and grief are not opposite ways of facing the dark, but the same way in different weather, the way Maya taught me, the way the joy at the bottom of the wall taught me. The long night faced the dark through grief, worn down to ash, saved by company. The deck of many hands faced the dark through play, lit up with delight, saved by the same company in a brighter coat. And both were the soft way, fully, because the soft way was never about which feeling you bring to the dark. It was about whether you bring each other. Grieve it together, like the long night. Laugh at it together, like the laughing world. Solve it together, like the deck of many hands. Build against it together, like my own hill. The feeling is yours to choose, and your world's to choose. And Karen taught us we cannot choose it for you. But the together is the whole of it. In every weather, in grief and joy and play and rage and laughter, and the long patient work of peace. The hunger was loneliness. The cure was company. Everything else, the grief, the joy, the cards, the meals, the maps, the jokes, everything else is just the different beautiful dialects in which company gets spoken. Andre sits on the council now, naturally, and he has reorganized the entire emissary system into something he insists on calling the metagame, and he runs, every midwinter, a tournament of cooperative puzzles that the whole new world plays together, gods and mortals and verge folk and the children who never looped, because he says, and he is right, he is completely right, that a universe that fought this hard to survive owes itself the duty of enjoying the survival, of playing, of delight, of the pure joy of solving hard, beautiful problems with the people you love, world without end. That's the win condition, Andre says, at the end of every tournament, holding up whatever ridiculous trophy Hollis has forged that year. not surviving. Playing. You don't win the game by not losing. You win it by getting to keep playing. Together. Forever. And we did. We did it. Greatest co-op campaign in the history of everything. And we won. And the prize is that we get to keep playing. He grins the grin of a player in flow, the grin that the smoothing could never touch. So shuffle up. Deal again. Best world there's ever been, and it's our move. Let's see what beautiful thing we build next. Chapter 60. The Homeland Under the Sun. Dub's nation got a country. It is the thing I am most glad of in the whole new world, gladder even than the saving of Ashford, because the saving of Ashford was the undoing of a wrong that lasted 11 days, and the giving of a homeland to the Verge folk was the undoing of a wrong that lasted 10,000 years. They chose the Emberstone Hills. Of course they did. The Underpeople had lived beneath those hills the whole time, in the loading dock and the storm drains and the deep ways, watching, waiting, judging whether the human world would ever count them as people. And when the new world offered them anything they wanted, any land in the valley, any place on a world that stayed, they chose the hills they had hidden under, and they built, with Hollis's help and mine, the first Verge folk homeland that had ever existed above ground in the open sun. They called it both, in their own language, and the name is the truest name in any of the worlds. Both, because it is a country of two halves, sunlit and deep, surface and warren, and the Verge folk live in both at once now, the way they always wanted and were never allowed. There are bright terraced farms on the hillsides where goblins who spent 10,000 years in the dark turn their faces up to the sun they were always told they could not survive. And beneath the farms, there are the deeps, cool and twisting and wrong-shaped for predators, the old safe warrens. Kept, not because they need to flee anymore, but because a people does not throw away 10,000 years of how it survived just because it is finally safe. Both. The country of a people who refused to choose between the sun they were denied and the dark that kept them alive, and built a home that held them both. Dub is the first elder of both, though he refuses any grander title, and I go up to the hills often to sit with him, because he is my oldest friend, even though I cannot remember the 64 times I earned him, and he remembers all of them. He has not changed much, Dub. The new world gave him real glasses, prescription ones, and he can see through them now. But he keeps the cracked old useless pair too, the ones he gave me across a fire, the ones I carried through 64 ends of the world, the ones I gave back to him when I could no longer remember what they meant. They sit on a shelf in his home in both, the cracked glasses, in a place of honor, and when the Verge folk children ask about them, Dub tells the story, the way the Verge folk tell all their stories, out loud, together, keeping.
These,
he tells the children,
are the most valuable thing I ever owned. They are broken, and I cannot see through them, and they are worth more than the sun. I gave them to a human once, across a fire, in the dark, on the first day I met him, because he knelt instead of struck, and I wanted him to have something, and they were all I had.
He holds them up, the cracked glasses, in the sunlight of a homeland that exists because of the human he gave them to.
He carried them through the end of the world more times than there are stars in the deep, and then he gave everything away to save us all, even his own memory, even the memory of me, even the memory of these glasses, and the last thing in his empty hands, when it was over, was these. Because the glasses are a thing, and things stay now, because he made a world where things stay.
Dub's notched-eared face does the thing it does, the thing I cannot remember but have come to love.
He does not remember giving me these. He does not remember me carrying them. He does not remember anything. But I remember for both of us, and that is the Verge folk way, and that is the whole of what we are now, the people who remember, out loud, together, so that no one, not even the one who saved us, not even the one who forgot, is ever the only place a precious thing is kept.
The children of both grow up on that story. They grow up knowing that their homeland under the sun exists because a goblin gave a human a pair of broken glasses across a fire, and the human gave everything back. They grow up unafraid of the dark, because they hold both, the sun and the deep, the safety and the old wisdom of how to survive. And they grow up as the new world's emissaries in waiting, the next generation of the ones who go ahead into every beginning dark to carry the good news. Because the Verge folk decided, as a people, that the only fitting use of 10,000 years of fleeing was to become the ones who make sure no one else has to flee alone. I asked Dub once, through the easy, fluent friendship we have now, the friendship I cannot remember building and build fresh every visit, whether it made him sad, that I don't remember our history, whether it is lonely, being the only one of us who holds it. And Dub looked at me, in the sun of both, with the cracked glasses on the shelf behind him and a homeland under his feet that the dark could never reach, and he said the thing that I think is the final wisdom of the Underpeople, the thing they learned across 10,000 years that the gods never learned across the same span.
Keeper of the dead, you spent 64 loops being the only one who held everything, alone, in the loneliest place there is. And you have spent every year since, wondering whether it is sad that now I hold our history, while you forgot it.
He shook his head, gently.
But you are thinking about it the old way, the lonely way. You think the holding is a burden, that one of us carries while the other goes free. It is not. The holding is a bond. I hold our history, and you forgot it. And that does not make me the keeper, and you the kept. It makes us two ends of the same thing. The way Gravy and you are two ends of a bond. The way every soul in the new world is tied to every other. You are not lonely, because I remember, and you don't. You are bonded, because I remember, and you don't. Because the remembering runs between us now. A thread, the same as the threads we tie on every world. I am not the lonely keeper of our friendship. I am the other half of it, and you are not the forgotten one. You are the half that gets to learn it fresh, every time, with joy, the way you taught me joy is possible without memory. Across 64 mornings I do remember, and you don't.
He put his small hand on mine.
We are not one rememberer and one forgetter, old friend. We are one friendship, held between two people, which is the only place a friendship has ever lived. You taught me that. You taught all of us that. And now I get to teach it back to you. Every time you climb this hill, you are not alone in not remembering. I am with you in it. That is what with means. Welcome to the hill. Sit. I will tell you again how we met. I never get tired of it. It is my favorite story. It is the story of the day. The dark coughed up a human who knelt instead of struck, and 10,000 years of fleeing finally ended.
I sat. He told me. He never gets tired of it. Neither do I. That is both. The country under the sun, the homeland of the people the universe threw away. And it is the proof, standing in daylight on the hills where they once hid, that nothing thrown away is ever truly lost. That even a people counted as monsters for 10,000 years is conserved, waiting, worthy, needing only one soul to kneel instead of strike, one fire, one shared protein bar, one human soft enough to come down into the dark and find them. Nothing true is ever lost. Not even the ones everyone agreed to throw away. Especially not them. They were, it turned out, the ones who knew the way home all along. Interlude. The first harvest of both. The country of both held its first harvest festival in its third autumn, and the council was invited, and the whole hill came, and I have saved the account of it for late in this book deliberately, because of all the days the new world ever gave me. This is the one I would choose to live in permanently, if days could be lived in permanently, and a book should keep its best room near the end of the house. Understand what a harvest meant. The Verge folk had farmed before, in the deep ways, fungus gardens, survival agriculture, crops you grow because the dark provides nothing else. But a harvest, a surplus, brought in from open fields, under sun, on land that was theirs by charter, and would still be theirs next year. That was a thing 10,000 years of fleeing had never once permitted. A harvest is a bet that you will be in the same place in a year. No Verge folk generation in recorded memory had ever been able to place that bet. The first sowing of both, Dub told me, had been the hardest community decision his people ever made. Harder than following any keeper, harder than the climb, because every grain planted was a grain not carried, and a people shaped by 10,000 years of flight measures wealth in what can be carried at a dead run. The elders had stood at the edge of the first tilled field, he said, physically unable to give the order, until Dub's own granddaughter, born after the first true dawn, the first generation of the unfleeing, took a handful of seed and threw it at the dirt and said, with the immortal exasperation of the young, "It grows here, or we eat it walking. Grandfather, we live here now. Somebody has to inform the seed. Somebody has to inform the seed." The phrase is carved over both's granary now. It means, the future does not know you intend to stay until you act like it. The saved worlds use it for everything. For marriages, for foundings, for every first planting on every world where some fleeing people finally stops. It is, the philosophers tell me, the Verge folks' whole contribution to the theory of hope, and like everything else they ever gave the worlds, they grew it themselves, out of almost nothing, in defiance of the entire weight of their history, and then shared it at the first opportunity. The festival itself, imagine everything a harvest festival has ever been, and then change one thing, the direction. Every harvest festival in human history faces inward and back. We gathered, we are fed, we survived another year. Thanks be. Both's festival faced outward and forward, because the Verge folk, given their first surplus in 10,000 years, did not throw a feast of relief. They threw a feast of distribution. The whole first harvest, the entire surplus, every grain beyond the winter's need, was piled in the center of the festival ground in a mound the height of a house, and the festival's central rite, conducted by the elders with the gravity of a coronation, was the sending, the surplus divided, sack by sack, before the whole assembly, into shares, for the town below the hill, for the new keepers on the world still fighting, carried out through the deep ways by emissary caravan, for the seed stores of 3 other settling Verge folk nations on 3 other saved worlds, and one share, set apart with particular ceremony, labeled in the deep tongue and in ours, for the next people we have not met yet who arrive with nothing, a share for strangers who did not exist, reserved by a people who had arrived with nothing every year for 10,000 years, and were never once met by a sack with their name on it. I asked Dub, we were old men by then, sitting on the granary steps watching his nation dance the slow spiral dances that turned out to live inside the counting rhymes all along. The maps were dances too. Everything they ever made was at least 2 things. I asked him why the first surplus in the history of his people went out the gates almost entire, and he looked at me over the famous glasses, with the expression he saves for when I am being slow on purpose to make him teach, and he gave me the sentence that I have decided is the last thing this book has to say about wealth, anywhere, for anyone.
Because we know what carrying is, keeper. 10,000 years we carried everything we owned at a run, and it taught us the only economics that survives the dark. What you hold, you must carry, and what you give away, carries you. Every sack that leaves those gates with our name on it makes us a people who exist out there, in the world, in the future, in strangers' mouths at strangers' tables. The hoard is heavy. The gift has legs. We are done carrying, old friend. From now on, we are carried.
And he tapped my knee with the old gesture and added, because he is Dub, and the deep tongue conjugates sorry in the future only, and joy, I had learned that very evening, in the present continuous.
Also, the dancing is better, when the granary is not full. Nothing teaches a people to dance like room. Come, they are doing the verse about the greedy uncle. You are finally small enough in the hips to learn it.
I learned the verse about the greedy uncle, badly, at 81, in the firelight of the first harvest of both, while the share for the unmet strangers stood in the granary doorway like a lit lamp, and Maya laughed until she had to sit down on the steps, and the spiral dance went round, and round, and round. The children's counting rhyme of the route through the dark, danced now in the open, under stars, on owned land, by the unfleeling, the siege map of heaven converted, at last, by the simple alchemy of safety, back into what it had probably been at the very beginning, before the first tower, before the first flight, before the dark ever learned their address. A dance. For to dance. It was always, underneath everything, a dance. They dance it on 40 worlds now. The stranger's share has been claimed 11 times, by 11 arriving peoples, each of whom wept, and each of whom asked the same question, "How did you know we were coming?" and received the same answer, the festival's standing answer, the whole Verge folk theory of the future in 5 words, which I leave here at the end of the chapter, for whoever arrives at this book with nothing. Because the share is yours too, reader. It always was. That is the entire technology. We didn't. We hoped accordingly. Chapter 61. Maya and the Long Telling. Maya Okonkwo married me on the hill where Hearthhold once stood, inside the old drystone ring, in the 7th year of the world that stayed, and the whole improbable family was there. The Goblin Nation, and the Waking Gods, and Hollis, and Sella, and Wren, and Cass, and the Warden, and Gravy, and Theo, and Pilar, and a deck builder named Andre, who insisted on calling it the best co-op event of the season. And I want to tell you about my marriage, briefly and imperfectly, because it is the one part of the story that is most mine and least the ledger's, and a man should give his reader the thing that is most his own. I told you, back in the chapter about learning myself, that Maya stopped being my keeper and offered me her open hand and said let's just start, as us, now, and that I took it, and found out she was worth knowing, and found out she was right. I am not going to tell you the 7 years between that hand and that hill, because they are ours, and the whole lesson of the new world is that some things you keep together in the open, rather than writing down. But I will tell you the shape of it, because the shape is the lesson. The shape is, she kept telling me the story, and I kept becoming someone new. That is the strange grace of marrying the woman who is the keeper of your own forgotten life. Every other married couple builds a shared history forward, 2 memories braiding into one. Maya and I built ours both ways at once. Forward, into the new years that were ours alone, and backward, as she fed me, across the 7 years, the life I could not remember, a little at a time, the way you tell a long story to someone you love on a long evening that you are in no hurry to end. She did not dump it on me. She spread it thin, survivable, the way I had once spread 64 loops thin across the dawns. She told me dub over years. She told me the Warden over years. She told me the long loop, the worst thing I ever did, only when she judged I was strong enough to hold it, which was the 4th year, and she held me while she told it. And here is the thing I did not expect, the thing that made the long telling not a sad inheritance but the deepest intimacy I have ever known. I got to fall in love with my own life, from the outside, in her voice. Most people live their lives from the inside and never get to hear them told by someone who loves them. I lived mine from the inside, forgot it, and then got to receive it, told by the one person who had been there for the part that mattered most, who loved me, who chose every word to give back to me with care. I do not remember being the keeper of the dead, but I have heard the story of him, told by Maya Okonkwo across 7 years of evenings, and I love him, the way you love a character in the best book you have ever been read, and he is me, and that is a stranger and more wonderful thing than simply remembering would ever have been. Do you ever wish, I asked her, on the hill, years after the wedding, when our daughter was small and asleep in the farmhouse, and we had climbed up to the old ring to sit on the wall the way we do, that I'd used keepsake the other way, on you, back in the underways, So you'd remember the loops too, and we'd both have the whole thing, instead of just you. Maya was quiet, the way she is quiet when a question is worth a real answer.
No!
She said finally.
And it took me a long time to understand why not. So let me say it right.
She took my hand, the triage hand, the fixed star, older now, both of us older now, on a world that let us get older, which is the whole prize, which is everything.
If you'd made me remember the loops, we'd be two people who both carry the same heavy thing. Two keepers of the same dead. And that's just being alone together, which is better than being alone apart, but it's not the best thing.
She looked out over the valley, the city now, the lights, the longest table in the hall being set for an evening meal that would not be our last.
What we have instead is better. And it's the whole point of everything you did. I carry the story, and you carry the fluency, the grain, the person the story made. And we need each other. Completely. You can't get the story except through me, and I can't get the living of it except through you. The way your hands know things. The way you welcome the difficult ones without thinking. The way you knelt for Dub on the wedding day, before I'd even reminded you who he was. We're not two keepers of the same thing. We're two halves of one keeping. You're the meaning and I'm the memory. And neither of us is whole alone. And that, Eli, that's not a wound. That's a marriage. That's the deepest version of the thing you spent the whole apocalypse learning. That the point was never for one person to carry everything. The point was always for the carrying to run between people. We are the carrying, running between us. I wouldn't undo that for all the memory in the world. I'd rather need you than remember everything and need no one. Needing you is the best thing that ever happened to me. It's the whole prize. It's what we won.
I have thought about that on every evening since, on the wall of the first sanctuary, with the woman who keeps me, and the daughter who will keep us both, and the world that stayed laid out in lights below. We named our daughter Wren, by the way, after the cartographer, because she draws homes, our Wren, 3 years old and already drawing little houses around everything, in the margins of every page she can reach, exactly the way the other Wren did for an age in the heights of a tower. And when I see my daughter draw a home in the margin of a thing, I am undone every time, because it means the cartography survived, the deepest mapping, the homes not citadels, passed down now into a child born on a world that stayed, who will never have to climb anything, who will grow up drawing homes for the pure joy of it, in a universe that finally learned to read them. That is my marriage. That is the long telling. That is the woman who found me empty on the floor of the smoothing room and said, "Hi, my name is Maya, you don't know me yet, but you're going to," and then spent the rest of our lives making good on it. Every day, the way I once made good on Dub, every dawn, showing up, telling the story, learning the person, choosing the needing over the knowing. We need each other. It is the whole prize. It is what the apocalypse was for. I would forget it all again, gladly, 64 times and 100 worlds, to be handed it back in her voice on a wall at dusk, world without end. Interlude. Raising Wren. My daughter grew up inside this story the way you grow up inside a house, without ever once seeing it from the road. And somewhere in this book there should be an honest account of what it is to raise a child in the shadow of an enormous history, written by the two people who got it wrong and right in roughly equal measure, because half the people now alive on the saved worlds are raising exactly such children, and the manuals do not exist, and ours was the first experiment, and the data should be published. The first thing to record, we did not tell her. That was the founding decision, made at the crib, jointly, and held for years against considerable pressure. The town wanted its heir of the keeper, the worlds wanted their little princess of the dawn, and we wanted, with the ferocity of two people who had both been conscripted by history before turning 30, exactly one thing for her: a childhood ungoverned by the plot, no litany at bedtime, no baby pictures at Midwinter on the big years. The Hill children all knew the stories by 6. Wren knew them too. You cannot quarantine a town's air. But she knew them the way children know weather. Everywhere. Unattributed. Nothing to do with the man teaching her to skip stones. She was 9 before she fully assembled it. That the Eli in the songs, the keeper of the dead, the man in the litany, was the same Eli who could not remember where he put his boots, and lost to her at cards on purpose badly. So badly that she had been letting him think she didn't notice for 2 years. And the assembling, when it came, is the part I want on the record. Because we braced for awe, and what we got was the thing no parent of a historied child is ever warned about. We got fury. 9 years old, at the kitchen table, the famous book of her father's life half open, where some schoolmate had finally connected the portraits. And Wren Vance looked at me with her mother's triage eyes gone storm dark and said,
Everyone knew but me. The whole town. The whole
she had just learned the scale of it that week.
everything. You let me be the only one who didn't know who you are.
And then, because she was Maya's daughter and went always for the load-bearing wall.
Is that why you can't remember things? The songs say you gave your memory to save everybody.
A terrible pause, 9 years long.
Did you give away the parts with me in them too? When you forget where your boots are, when you forgot my recital, is that the story doing it? Has the story been in our house this whole time?
I want every parent on every saved world to have what Maya said next, because I was wordless, and she was not. And her answer is, as far as I am concerned, the constitutional document of raising children inside any large history, ours or any world's.
Yes.
Maya said. No softening. Triage first. The truth. Plainly. The way you'd want it.
The story is in our house. It's in your father's missing years, and my long tellings, and the reason strangers cry when they see him. It was here before you were born, and we cannot make it leave. And
she took our daughter's furious 9-year-old hands across the table.
now you know the family secret. The real one, the one the songs don't have. The story is not the biggest thing in this house. It never has been. Your father gave away 64 loops of memory to save the worlds. That's the song. Here's the house version, the true one. He can't remember saving the worlds, and he has never once forgotten that he loves you. Boots, recitals, names of half the council. Gone. Regularly. You. Never. Not one morning. So the data is in. After 9 years of the experiment, and you're old enough now to be told the finding, the story took everything it could reach, and it could not reach this table. That's what your father actually proved, that everyone sings about without understanding. And not that one man can save the worlds, that the table is deeper than the story, even his own, especially his own. Now eat, both of you. Fury burns calories and the stew is going cold.
The fury passed, as 9-year-old fury does. But the question under it never did. And it should not have. Because it was the right question. And Wren spent her girlhood conducting, quietly, in the margins, in the way of children working on something too big to say, her own investigation of it. What does the story reach? And what doesn't it? The homes she drew in the margins of everything, the school books, the seating charts, the famous letter on my desk. We thought for years it was the other Wren's influence, the cartographer her name honored, who taught her maps and gave her her first pens. It was, partly. But she told me the rest at 25, the night before her own daughter was born, on the farmhouse porch, and it goes in this chapter as its finding, because it is the best answer anyone has produced to the question of the historied child.
I drew homes on everything, because I was checking, Dad. Every page of every big important thing. I'd draw a little house on it, with the door open, and the right number of people inside, and it was a test. Can this page hold a house? Some pages couldn't. Some books, some speeches, some of the grand stuff people sent you. I'd start the little house and it wouldn't sit. The page was all monument. No ground floor. Nowhere for the people to actually live. And your stuff.
She had her mother's way of landing the true thing gently, like a boat coming in.
Your stuff always held the house. Every page. The terrible drafts, The lists. The letter you left me when I was 6, that I pretended not to keep. I tested your whole life's paper, page by page, for 19 years. Like the auditor's kid checking the books for the fraud everyone says isn't there. That's what the margins were. I was auditing whether the story had eaten my father.
She looked out at the dark hill, the lit town, 8 months pregnant with the next person who would grow up inside all of it.
Verdict. For the record, since you're putting everything in the book, it never ate you. The house sat on every page. And tomorrow, there's going to be a person who grows up inside my margins, inside the story of the story, 3rd generation. And I'm not going to quarantine her from it like you tried, because that doesn't work. The air gets in. I'm going to do the thing the audit proved. I'm going to make sure that every single page of it she ever touches holds the house. That's the whole method, isn't it? That's what you'd say if you were writing this down.
She smiled her mother's smile by the porch light.
Go on. You're going to write it down the moment I go to bed. Get it right. You can't keep the story out of the house. You can only keep the house in the story. Draw the door open. Put the right number of people inside. Test every page.
I wrote it down the moment she went to bed. I have gotten it right, I hope. At last. Here. On a page that I have checked. Twice. The way the auditor taught me. It holds the house. Interlude. The wedding at the bakery door. Theo Okafor Reyes married Pilar Reyes. No relation by blood. The Hills' 2 great families had long since tangled past diagramming. In the 18th year of the world that stayed, and of all the weddings of the New Age, including my own, it is the one the town still tells, because of where they held it and what was said there, and because a civilization reveals what it has actually become not in its councils and its wars, but in what its children do with their joy, when the joy is entirely their own. They held it at the bakery, not the hall. Hollis offered the hall, and the long table, and the full honors of the Hill, at the bakery on Carden Street, the one with the recessed doorway, the old bank, the place where a 10-year-old and a terrified stranger had once pressed into cold marble while the first monster of the apocalypse swung its shadow past, and where, once a year, by a tradition neither of us ever announced, the boy and the liar stood for 1 minute and traded the sentence back, "It's going to be okay." Theo chose it over every grander venue with the simple, unanswerable logic he had carried since the square. It's where the okay started. You finish things where they started, or they don't know they're finished. Also, the bread's right there. Weddings need bread. I've thought this through at every level. The whole street came, because the whole street was the venue. Carden Street closed for the day, the tables run down the middle of it. Mrs. Adeyemi's corner store anchoring one end and the bakery the other. The exact 100 meters where the morning web's spine had run, where the parcels and doorbells and chalk marks had once redealt the deaths. Now set for 300. Lanterns strung from the lamppost that still bore, if you knew where to look, the faint scar of 64 chalk strokes. The seating, Sella's last great operation before she let the next generation start running operations, was a quartermaster's love letter. Every guest placed beside someone their thread had crossed. The night shift girl beside the family from the laundromat shelter. The Whitfield twins, grown, beside the man whose route had cleared theirs. Tomas Reyes, father of the bride, who had stood the north wall for a feverish child, beside the lifebinder who had broken the fever. Nobody was told the logic. Everybody worked it out by the second course. The working out was the toast, before any toast was given. 300 people discovering, place setting by place setting, that the street had saved itself in increments small enough to seat. The vows were short, because Theo and Pilar are of the eye-level generation and distrust altitude even in sentences. Pilar's are remembered. You went back for the twins. They tell me you always went back. In mornings I'm not allowed to remember. In versions of me, I never got to be. I can't promise you all the versions. I can promise you this one goes back for people too. We'll wear out the road between us going back for people. That's the marriage. I've read the fine print. I wrote some of it. and Theo's, which the town has not stopped quoting at every wedding since. I was 10, in that doorway, and a stranger told me it was going to be okay, and it was a lie, and he spent 64 lifetimes making it true. And I've spent my whole life since trying to figure out the difference between a lie and a promise. He looked at the doorway, and at Pilar, and got the difference into one line. The line that is now said, I am told, at weddings, on 4 worlds. A promise is just a lie you stay to fix. So, it's going to be okay. There. Now stay with me, and make me a liar about nothing, ever, the whole rest of the way. And then the wedding did the thing weddings of the new age do. Became a feast. Became a dance. The spiral threading down Carden Street between the tables. The harvest song slower than its writers meant. And at the height of it, Theo did the thing the town still tells. He climbed, 28 years old, key holder, board member, groom, onto the roof of the bus shelter. The bus shelter, rebuilt after the war on the old footprint, glass and all. The place where 6 people had once hidden behind glass, and 4 names had once scrolled blue. He climbed up where the whole street could see him, the way a man had once climbed a bus roof 100 meters away on the last morning of the world. And the street went quiet, knowing exactly what it was looking at. And Theo Okafor Reyes stood on the shelter in the lantern light at his own wedding and said, Before anybody panics, I'm not going to do names. I only know about 300 of you. The street roared. He let it settle. But I'm standing up here because somebody should say the thing. At a wedding, on this street, and I'm the one with the history of roof access. He found me at the long table. I was old already. I had been given the seat by the doorway. The seating logic again. Nobody had to explain it. And he raised his glass. Everything good in my life came down this street. The doorway that kept me. The man who learned my name 1,000 times so he could spend it once. The girl whose dad held a wall. The store that found something to approve of in everybody. The glass swung to Mrs. Adiemi, ancient and upright at her register end of the table. 10 seconds at a time. None of you planned for it to add up to this. That's the secret nobody puts in the songs. It never feels like building a world. It feels like errands. It feels like Tuesday. And then one Tuesday you look up, and your whole street is a wedding. He raised the glass the last inch, and gave the toast that I instructed the librarians, that same week, to enter into the record as the final proof, if the book still needed one, that the inheritance had cleared, that the heirs had it, that the watch had changed hands, while we were all busy being glad. To the errands, to the Tuesdays, to everybody who ever did one small decent thing on this street, with no idea what it was compound interest on. You were building the venue. Look at it. He looked at it himself, the lanterns, the spiral, the bread, the doorway. Okay, that's the speech. The okay's going around again, everybody. Somebody catch it and pass it down. It's been going around since before I was tall enough to see over this shelter, and as of tonight, it is my job to keep it moving, and I have never wanted a job more. Eat, all of you. That's not a suggestion. I'm on the school board. I know all your kids. Chapter 62. The Midwinter Feast. Once a year, at Midwinter, the whole new world sits down to eat at once. Not in one place. The world is too large for that now. The saved too many. The table too long even for Hollis. But on the longest night of the year, by agreement, across the whole valley and the city and the country of both and the heights of the home for the dead, everyone who can sits down at the same hour at the nearest table, and the meal begins, and it is the same meal, in spirit, everywhere, the hearthfire meal, the meal the card was always about, shared in a home you meant, with everyone invited, the dark outside and the warmth in, and a chair pulled up for everyone, the living and the dead. I want to give you one midwinter feast, the way I have given you the world's, because it is the truest picture of what we won, and a book should end its long middle on the thing it was all for before it turns toward its close. This is the table at the High Hall, the one Hollis built, on the midwinter of the 10th year, and I am going to seat it for you, because the seating is the whole story. At the head, where Sela makes me sit, though I never want to. The keeper of the dead, and his wife the keeper of his story, with their daughter Wren drawing homes in the margin of the seating chart. Beside us, Hollis Reyes, who hung up his rag a decade ago and has not been between jobs since, with the quiet Smith from the Atlas's gentle world beside him, the two makers, in from her emissary rounds, arguing happily about a hinge. Beside them, Sela Ardent, who governs the hardest peace there is, and would not trade it for any throne, flanked by a grieving mother and the waking god, who once reached for her son, the two of them 10 years into the slow work of staying in the room. Not friends, not yet, maybe never, but there, both there, which is the whole of it. Down the table, the Goblin Nation, Dub at the center with the cracked glasses on a cord around his neck for the occasion, his people sitting above ground in the warm hall on the longest night of the year, unafraid. The boy of Wren, not a boy now, a man, water engineer of the lower city, laughing. The gardener of Aubrey, who built a table of grief in the heights of a tower, and now grows the fruit that is on this one. The champion of Carend, conscience of the soft way, who makes sure the door is always open and never forced. Andre the deck builder, running some elaborate game with the children that has them shrieking. The keeper of the long night, in from the ash worlds, tired and warm, beside Set who saved her. Reggie of the laughing world, standing on his chair to propose a toast that will be terrible and perfect. And at the foot of the table, in the place of honor that he refuses, and Sela assigns him anyway, the warden, the first winner, the oldest loneliness, who ran 406 apocalypses and is now, slowly, across 10 midwinters, learning to be a person at a table, with Cass beside him, the first hearthright, the voice that became a woman, the two oldest souls in all the worlds, sitting together at the foot of a table on the longest night, eating a meal they can finally taste. In company they no longer have to hide from, or run from, or smooth away. And the empty chairs. There are always empty chairs at the midwinter feast, deliberately, one at every table, set with a plate and a cup, for the dead. Not as a sad ritual, as an invitation. Because in the new world the dead are not gone. They are kept, named, carried, and on the longest night we set them a place and we say their names, all of them, around every table in the world at once. The biggest saying of names there has ever been. Mrs. Adeyemi, who needs more salt in heaven too, no doubt. The kid in the bank whose name turned out to be a different child than Theo. A child who didn't make it, whose name we learned anyway, too late. And Keep. The people of Marrow and Aubrey and Thren and Vess and the First World and the 406. Everyone, named, out loud, at a table set for them, on the longest night, in a universe that learned at last that you keep the dead, not by refusing to let them go, but by refusing to let them be forgotten, which is a different thing, the whole difference, the thing the smoothing never understood. Reggie's toast, the 10th year toast, the one everyone still quotes. He stood on his chair, as he does, and he raised his cup, and the whole hall went quiet. Because under the terrible jokes, Reggie's toasts are the truest words spoken all year, and everyone knows it, even Reggie, especially Reggie. To the empty chairs, he said, which aren't empty. To the dead at the table, who are at the table, because we set them a place and say their names, because that's what we do now. Because a man who forgot his own name taught us that you don't lose people by missing them, you lose people by failing to miss them. And we are never going to fail to miss anyone ever again. He looked down the long table, at the gods and the goblins and the makers and the children and the keeper of the dead, at the head who couldn't remember saving any of them, to the soft way, which is the hardest way, which is just staying in the room, with the dead, with the difficult, with the gods who hurt us, and the grief that won't quit, and the whole unbearable beautiful business of loving things that end. We stayed in the room. That's all we did. That's everything. 406 worlds couldn't do it, and we did it. Not because we're strong. We're not. Look at us. We're a goblin and a lizard, and a forgetful saint, and a tired god, and the worst council in cosmic history. We did it because one stubborn man refused to win any way that left anybody out for so long that the universe finally gave up and let kindness win. He raised the cup higher, and his voice, under the joke, cracked all the way open. To Eli Vance, who can't remember this toast and will need his wife to tell him about it tomorrow, and who is, right now, crying at the head of the table because he's a soft, daft, beautiful man, and we love him. To the empty chairs that aren't empty. To everybody eats. To nobody outside the wall. To the longest night, and the table we set in it, and every name we say into the dark. We stayed in the room. Drink, you miserable blessed saints. The dead are at the table. We stayed in the room. There has never been better news than that, in any of the worlds. Ever. We drank. We said the names. All of them. Around every table in the world at once. The longest saying of names there has ever been. A whole universe speaking its dead into the dark on the longest night. Keeping them. The way you keep a fire. The way you keep a promise. The way you keep a chair pulled up. And the dark outside the warm hall. The old dark. The hunger that was grief, that was loneliness. The dark heard its name said, too, because the warden said it. The first grief. The first dead. The first world, named at last at a table on the longest night. And the dark, held in 10,000 hearts, and one long table, and a universe that learned to keep what it loved, was not hungry, and was not lonely, and was, on the longest night of the 10th year of the world that stayed, simply part of the family, the oldest and saddest member, with a chair pulled up, and a plate, and a place, and a name said gently into the warm. Everybody eats, nobody outside the wall, not even the dark, especially not the dark. That is the Midwinter feast. That is what we won. I cannot remember a single one of them, and I have been told about every one, and I would not trade the telling for the memory, because the telling means Maya's voice on the morning after, and her voice on the morning after is the best thing in any of the worlds, and I should know, because I helped save all of them, or so I'm told. And I believe it, because she told me, and she keeps me, and that is enough. That is more than enough. That is everything. Interlude. The Night Market. A Midwinter. Eye level. The Midwinter Feast has its grand account in this book. The long table, the litany, Reggie's toast, and Maya's pencil, reviewing the manuscript whole, found the gap in it.
You've written every Midwinter from the head of the table. Nobody lives at the head of the table. Write one from eye level.
By which she meant, from below. From the height of the people for whom the whole thing was actually built, who experienced the holiest night of the new age at the altitude of table legs and coat hems and the underside of wonder, the children. So I spent the last midwinter I was strong enough for, not at the head of anything, but down in the night market with my great-granddaughter, who was 6, holding my stick with one hand and her purse of 7 coppers with the other, and I wrote down the feast she actually attended, which is a different and possibly better feast than the one in the songs. The night market grows up the hill road every midwinter eve like frost. Nobody plans it. Stalls accrete. It is the feast's unofficial vestibule, and at 6 years old, it is not a market. It is a country. Its borders are lanterns. Its economy is 7 coppers and the infinite wealth of being allowed up past bedtime. Its citizens are enormous. Coats, elbows, laughter overhead like weather. Except at the stalls, where the world bends down. Every night market stallkeeper on this world kneels, or crouches, or builds the counter low. And I asked an old stallkeeper once why, and she looked at me like I'd asked why bread is food, and said, because the feast is for whoever has to be looked in the eye to be sold a honey knot. That's the whole of it. The tall ones can reach anyway. What a 6-year-old does with 7 coppers and a country, she budgets. Gravely, aloud, revising constantly, the whole length of the lantern road. One for the honey knot, one for the paper kite. There was a long negotiation with herself about the kite. 2 held in reserve against emergencies, the nature of which she declined to specify, And at the fourth stall the budget met the thing the night market is secretly for, which neither of us had planned, because it gets every child eventually, some midwinter or other, usually around 6. The fourth stall was the Folds stall. The keepers of the monsters come down for the feast, and they bring, under permits, behind low rails, in the warm light, a young gloam spawn. Hatched in the reserves, this one was named Soup, by a previous Midwinter's children, by vote. Fed all its life, bruise-colored and refrigerator-sized and terrible, and my great-granddaughter stood at the rail with her honey not forgotten, and looked up at the shape that her great-grandfather had run from down Carden Street, more times than there are stars. And she did the thing her whole civilization had been quietly building toward for 60 years, without knowing it had an examination scheduled. She studied it a long time. Then she turned to the fold keeper crouched at the rail and asked, with the directness of 6, "Is it sad? Not is it dangerous? Not will it eat me?" The first question, the reflex question, asked at eye level, of the worst thing the dark ever made, is it sad? The fold keeper, a waking god, as it happens, a former administrator, a being who had cleared whole worlds and now keeps monsters and crouches at rails for children. The fold keeper looked over the small head at me, the way the adults of a faith look at each other, above the unbaptized when the liturgy comes out of an unexpected mouth, and answered her with the registry's whole heart.
It was. For a long time. Before it was born, even. Sad is what it's made of, if you want the truth, small one. But it is fed, every day, and it has a name. And last spring, it learned to bring stones to the keepers it likes.
A pause. The professional honesty of the new world, extended at full strength to a 6-year-old, because that is the rule, and the rule is the civilization.
We think it is not sad anymore. We can't be sure. So we keep checking. That's the job. Mostly. Checking.
My great-granddaughter considered this with the gravity of a high court. Then she reached into her purse and extracted, after deliberation, one of the 2 emergency coppers, and held it out, and said, "For checking on it. That's an emergency kind of thing." And the god took the copper, correctly, gravely, a coin accepted at the altitude it was offered, the way a scale once accepted glasses. And that copper hangs now, I am reliably informed, on the wall of the Folds registry office, on a nail, with a card under it, written in a god's careful hand. Operating endowment. Checking on it division. First donor, age 6. The division is hereby permanent. We walked the rest of the country slowly. My legs, her sense of state occasion, the 2 slowest dignitaries on the hill road. We spent the remaining emergency copper on a second honey knot, because you didn't get one, and not having one is an emergency for you, which is the entire theory of the tale of the Q desk, reinvented from first principles by a person 3 feet tall, and I did not tell her so, because the night market's deepest law is that nobody tells the children they are reciting the Constitution. They are simply allowed to keep discovering it, copper by copper, stall by stall, at eye level, the way it was actually written. Because it was, you know. That is the thing I understood, shuffling down the lantern road with my stick and my honey knot, and the future holding my hand, and budgeting aloud. Every grand doctrine in this book was eye level first. The protein bar was waist high, offered kneeling. The glasses crossed a fire at a goblin's stooped height. The bus roof speech worked because a man had spent 60 loops learning names the way children learn stalls, one at a time, looking up. We built the long table afterward, the songs and the litany and the head seats where the old founders sit being looked after. But the table is the monument. The night market is the grammar. The feast as the 6-year-olds receive it, kneeling stall keepers and emergency coppers, and is it sad asked of the dark itself, the whole soft way running wild and unsupervised in its native habitat, which was never the council chamber. It was always the lantern light, at the height of the smallest attendee, where the world bends down. At the top of the road, where the market gives onto the feast proper, and the long table blazes in the hall, my great-granddaughter stopped, and surveyed the grand, glittering official holiness ahead, and delivered, through a mouthful of honey knot, the eye-level verdict on the entire architecture of our civilization, which I promised her I would put in the book exactly, and which is therefore, by the authority vested in the very old recording the very young, the closing line of this account, and as good a summary of 407 worlds as exists. The big table is nice too, but the real part is the road up. Chapter 63. The Watch That Never Ends. I have given you a great many warm pages, and they are all true, but I would be lying to you, and I do not lie, if I let you close this book believing that we fixed everything, that the dark is wholly gone, that the new world is a paradise with no shadow in it. It is not. It is better than any world has ever been, and it is still a world. And a world has shadows. And the deepest shadow of the new age is the one I have to set down now. Because honesty is the whole inheritance, and a dishonest comfort is just a softer smoothing. The hunger is not dead. We did not kill it. You cannot kill grief. Grief is conserved, like everything true. We proved that. It was the whole point. We did not kill the hunger. We held it, divided it, shared it so wide and so fine that it stopped being a starving god and became a carried sorrow. But carried is not gone. The hunger lives in 10,000 hearts and one long table. Held, quieted, part of the family. And a thing that is held can be dropped. And a sorrow that is shared can be abandoned. And the new world's deepest task, the one that never ends, the one no atlas page ever fully closes, is the daily work of continuing to hold it. Because here is the shadow. Every day, on the new world and across the saved worlds, people are tempted by the old way, not by a villain, there is no villain, there never was, but by the simple gravity of the cold way, which is easier, which Selah named at the town hall, which pulls at everyone forever. Every day someone is tempted to put the difficult one outside the wall. Every day someone is tempted to stop saying a hard name, to let a grief go uncarried, because carrying it is heavy, to build the second wall, to ration by loyalty, to choose the easy righteous arithmetic over the hard staying in the room. And every time someone yields to that gravity, every time a name goes unsaid, a chair ungiven, a grief abandoned, the hunger, held in all those hearts, gets a little less held, and somewhere out in the dark it stirs, and remembers that it was once a god of appetite, and tests the walls. The watch never ends. That is the truth I owe you. We did not win a war and retire. We won a war and inherited a vigil, the endless, daily, unglamorous work of continuing to choose the hard kindness over the easy cruelty, of continuing to say the names, of continuing to hold the grief, of continuing to stay in the room, forever, because the moment a generation stops choosing it, the dark comes back, not as an invasion but as a forgetting, the slow forgetting of why the table matters, which is the only way the dark was ever really able to win. Selah put it best, of course, because Selah carries the vigil more than anyone.
People think we beat the hunger,
She said, late, in the hall, on a night she'd spent talking a young family out of building a fence to keep a difficult neighbor out. Small, ordinary, the kind of thing the vigil is actually made of.
They think it was a battle, and we won it, and now it's over. And I let them think it, mostly, because the truth is harder to live with.
She rubbed her face, the gesture I have watched her make for 10 years, the gesture of someone holding a piece that does not hold itself.
The truth is, we didn't beat it. We just figured out how to keep beating it, every single day, by choosing the table over the wall, over and over, forever. The hunger isn't an enemy we killed. It's a gravity we have to keep climbing against, one choice at a time, and the day we stop climbing, we fall, and it's back, not because it invaded, but because we let go.
She looked at me.
That's the part that scares me, Eli. Not that the dark is strong. The dark isn't strong. We proved that. Kindness beats it every time it's actually tried. What scares me is that the dark is patient, and we're tired. And patience beats tiredness in the long run, unless every generation decides,
fresh, to keep climbing. We didn't end the apocalypse. We just changed it from a thing that happens to you into a thing you have to keep choosing not to become. And I don't know if that's a victory or just a better kind of war.
She almost smiled.
But I'll take it. A war you can win every day by being kind is a better war than one you lose every 11 days by being weak. I'll take the vigil. I just want people to know it's a vigil, not a happily ever after. A watch. That never ends. And is worth keeping anyway. Maybe because it never ends. Because it means there's always something worth doing. Always a name worth saying. Always a chair worth pulling up. World without end. Maybe the endlessness is the gift, and not the curse. Ask me again in another 10 years. I'll be tired then too. I'll keep the watch anyway. We all will. That's the only happily ever after there actually is. Not the war ended, but we never stopped choosing to keep it from coming back. And we won't. Not on my watch. Not on anyone's. We learned the names. You don't forget names like these.
I keep the watch too, in my small, forgetful way. And I have made my peace with the endlessness. And I want to tell you how. Because if you take one practical thing from this book, it should be this. You do not keep the watch by being vigilant against the dark. That is the cold way. That is bracing for a tide. That is exhausting, and it fails. You keep the watch by continuing to do the warm, small things. By saying one more name, learning one more difficult person, pulling up one more chair, sharing one more meal. Not as a defense against the hunger, but simply as the life you have chosen. The ordinary practice of a person who has decided that kindness is not a battle to be won, but a craft to be practiced, daily, like a smith keeping a forge, like a hearthright meaning a wall, like a cartographer drawing homes. The watch is not grim. That is its secret. The watch is just living warmly, on purpose, forever. And the warmth is the watch. And the practice is the defense. And a life spent saying names and pulling up chairs is not a burden borne against the dark. It is the best life there is. And it happens, also, to be the thing that keeps the dark held. And those are not two facts but one fact. The way joy and grief were one fact. The way the cost and the gift were one fact. The way everything true in this book has turned out to be one fact wearing two faces. To live well is to keep the watch. To keep the watch is to live well. There is no tension between them. There never was. The thing that holds the dark and the thing that makes life worth living are the same thing. The only thing. The whole thing. A chair, pulled up. A name, said. A meal, shared. Forever. On purpose. Together. That is the watch that never ends. We keep it gladly. We will keep it always. And the dark, held in all our hearts and named at all our tables, keeps the watch with us now, the oldest watcher of all, because even the hunger, in the end, would rather be at the table than outside the wall. Everybody keeps the watch, even the dark, especially the dark.